It was actually Imagine Documentaries who produced the film that contacted me about it. And, suffice to say, I was extremely enthusiastic about the idea of doing it because
Mm,
I had worked at ABC and I was a news producer for
mm,
10 years. I
right,
knew how important Barbara was. I knew how much she had shaped American broadcast news over the past 50 years.
right,
And I knew that it would be a completely fascinating story to tell. So I tried my hardest to
right,
get it, and
right.
here I am. Well, she actually did. So she did it for a long time, I think. But when she wrote her autobiography, Audition, I think it was 2008,
Mm.
she did a whole press tour around that. And
Oh,
you'll
I see.
notice in the film, we have a lot of her voice. It's
Okay.
mostly from those interviews that she did at that
Mm.
time. So, they were different sources, different people. Some of it was Oprah, some of it was Charlie Gibson, who was an ABC correspondent at the time, a couple
Right.
other sources, but we kind of made like a patchwork quilt of these different interviews and used that to have her narrate parts of the story. Well, I think what's really kind of interesting about Barbara and how she made, how she kind of got through this enormous amount of sexism that was shoveled at her over the years
Hmm.
is she said this herself a few times. She just didn't complain, which, is interesting. But also, there's, some women succeed but in like male dominated environments by becoming like the men. Barbara didn't do that at all. She didn't
Right.
like, she didn't change who she was. She actually leaned into the things that made her different. She
Right.
would ask these personal questions of important people that
Mm.
I just doubt a lot of the male journalists at the time were asking. She would write letters, she would make the phone calls, she would, sort of, I guess lean into femininity, I guess traditional femininity in some ways,
Mm.
to set herself apart. And I think that's really interesting and not something that's like talked about enough. She really stayed true to her own self, and used her like perceived weaknesses as a strength. She did. She talked about it a little bit. Other people, by the time she came to ABC, we have other people who were there at the same time. A lot of them are in the film. Her producer, Victor Neufeld, Bob Iger, even now the president of Disney or the CEO of Disney, rather. Um, I don't know what happened when she went home at night every night back then. But I think that her way of dealing with this stuff was to just desperately figure out a way to change the situation. And she ended up kind of like doing the same thing both at NBC and ABC, which is here I have an anchoring situation where the man next to me hates me or does not want me here for some reason or another. And instead of, trying to make this work, I'm going to leave the anchor desk, go out into the field and interview people and bring back bookings, bring back the kind of stuff people want to watch, prove my worth. And so
Right.
we saw her do that both networks, and she did it hugely after her big fail with Harry Reasoner, because the stakes were much higher there. She had just
Right.
gotten all this press for getting this huge contract for, being the first female
Yeah.
news anchor, and it just wasn't working. Like it was bad, and she really thought her career was over at that point in time. And there's definitely an alternate version of reality in which it was, but she
Mhm.
managed to just through sheer force of will beat back from that. Yeah, they definitely did. I mean, Roon Arledge was a huge supporter of Barbara, and he saw that her value that she brought. I think that he probably, I mean, I wasn't in the room, but I think that he probably saw that she was an innovative thinker.
Mhm.
Um, and, at the time, the idea of interviewing celebrities in a serious way was completely new.
Mm.
Like it wasn't something that was commonplace, right? And so he probably saw her doing that, going after these big gets, and he probably saw the potential in that, and that it was gonna much like in the way that he transformed sports, transformed news.
Hmm.
So for a very long time, they were very, very close, and I think in lockstep about sort of the future of the network and how things should be done. I think Barbara was the only one doing that at that point in time. And like, she was, I think, the only one taking celebrity interviews that seriously. And
Mm.
also, yeah, going to their houses, having this kind of friendly repertoire with them. Um,
Mm.
and, sitting on the floor with them, getting on the couch with them, talking about their home movies. I think that she was really amazing at channeling what the audience at home would be curious about. And, we want to understand, we want to know things about celebrities, right? That's like what drives an entire industry of celebrity journalism.
Mm.
Um, and so I think that she saw that quickly and liked how successful it was. But yeah, it was definitely pioneering at the time. Yeah, I mean, that was a very big moment for her career for sure. And
Right.
it was like right after her big flop, when she came over to ABC. So it was really important for her to succeed at that point. But
Right.
like it's kind of the same Barbara story you'll hear. She knew both of those men before.
Right.
She had interviewed both of them when she was at NBC. I
Mm.
don't know how close they were in reality, but she had an existing relationship with them. And
I
I think
see.
that worked to her advantage quite a bit in terms of being the one who was able to get them to sit together. But probably a lot of it was just her like ingenuity. She slipped them and like slipped President Sadat a note, asking
Oh,
him
I
for
see.
it.
Right. Right.
You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, who knows what else she would have, said. We only know what the stories are, but they definitely had a good chemistry, and it seemed like he really liked her.
Mm.
And they were both willing, to play ball with her and like let her have this. And so, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, of course, most people's childhoods inform them as adults, but I think in Barbara's case, it was especially important and
Yeah.
especially impactful.
Hmm.
And like, I think, growing up in this super glamorous, but also kind of seedy environment, um, she both admired and I think resented her father in some ways. And then, he loses everything. She has a mom who has no agency, doesn't have an education, she can't help herself, a sister who's got a mental disability, and so she feels this immense amount of responsibility and pressure to
Right. Right.
succeed in her career at a time when most women didn't even work at all.
Right.
Like so she like I think that once you know these things about her and you understand that, it actually kind of cracked the puzzle for me. I was like, oh, weird. Like, and then of course, knowing all these celebrities and realizing that they're just normal people underneath it all, sort of the cherry on top. But I think it explains a lot of her ambition and her fear of failure, which was like something that I think dogged her whole life. It was a strange relationship, I mean, from what I can tell, I think that they were close friends. And I think that she ultimately was really loyal to him, even
Mm.
later in his life when it was not advantageous for her to be loyal to him. Like it wasn't purely a transactional relationship.
Right.
I'm not really like, obviously he did her some favors. I'm not really sure what happened in between. They were at some point either joking about getting married or somewhat serious about getting married, which is strange since Roy Cohn was famously, I mean, he was closeted gay man at the time, but he's, famously now a gay man.
Right.
Um, so I don't, I think that's an interesting kind of mystery. I think Barbara liked his connections. I think she liked his power. She loved powerful people. She loved connected people. And
Right.
they ran in some of the same circles. That's how she knew President Donald Trump, or then just Donald Trump. They all
Right.
kind of ran in these same New York circles. And I mean, Roy Cohn famously, I don't know if you just watched that film, The Apprentice, that came out, but that was about Roy Cohn and Trump's relationship and how pivotal that was to the shaping of the man he became. I mean, the truth is like I didn't know a ton about her personal life at
Oh,
all.
no, I see.
So I have to say, like almost all of that was news to me. I think the Eureka moment, as I said before, was her childhood. Like that made a lot of sense to me, and it made her approach to relationships later make sense to me. I
Hmm.
think that, for whatever she felt about her dad, which I do think was a mix of feelings, I think she ultimately kind of became him. Like I think that was sort of the path that happened, and the things that she was disappointed about when he growing up, like he was never there, all these things. Like I think that she ultimately kind of followed in those footsteps. Whether she ever reckoned with that or not, I have no idea. Yeah, I think that, hers is really a story of perseverance. Like she just didn't ever take no for an answer, and that's inspiring in and of itself. But something I do think is really interesting about Barbara is that, and she was very honest about this. She said it herself. She wasn't doing it for everybody. She wasn't doing it for all women. She was doing
Right,
it for her own self.
right.
But she was really happy that like was effective and it broke a ceiling that a lot of other women have followed her through. I think that made her really happy ultimately.
Right.
But it's like she wasn't an activist.
Right.
And
That's
I think
true.
that's okay. There's like some nuance there that I think is interesting.
Mhm.
Like she was doing it because she wanted it, and then like she was really happy to kind of look behind her and realize it allowed all these people to follow in her footsteps. So
Mhm. Well, Jackie, thank you so much. I had a good time talking to you.
yeah, you too. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Have a
it.
good day. Thank you.